get started in just a moment. For folks, for people who are going to be watching, so there is a Q&A feature that you have that you'll find down at the bottom. And so I see a question that gallery view is still not available. So I'm not sure.
I have gallery view.
Yeah, I don't know if that's
us.
a issue for attendees,
Mm.
but you should be able to hopefully see the speakers. Yeah, so apparently there's no gallery view. So so David, our engineer, hopefully not David, our panelist, though.
Actually,
I'm not
I'm getting the gallery view easily, just
I am
okay.
too.
by checking the. It says view or
Upper right.
something like that. It's a little thing with. It's like a square with 3 dots on top, and the word view, or it's a Rubik's cube. If you see the Rubik's cube, that's the gallery view. If you see the square with the 3 dots, it's the speaker view, and I recommend the speaker view, and it will change according to who is speaking. But everybody does have that.
So there we go. Hopefully we have solved the problem enough. So we're gonna get started because we have a and unfortunately, I'm sorry if you don't, but we're gonna ask folks if you cannot use the chat going forward. So I'm actually going to be closing out the chat, and we would ask that only people who are actually on the panel, or if it's an emergency, because obviously I'm going to be moderating. But if you have an actual question, feel free. All right, so we understand that some people are having this glitch. So I think, unfortunately, it's something that's being looked into, and I think that your life will go on one way or the other. Considering all the things that 2020 has thrown at us, if not having gallery view is the worst that we can have today, I think we'll be all right. All right, great, thank you. So welcome to How I Got Produced. This is going to be a fabulous panel. We've got some amazing people. I'm going to introduce them to you now. And once we get going, if you have a question which is related to the panel, you can post it in the Q&A. I can't guarantee that we will get to every question, but we will try to get to at least to the good ones. So so ask good ones, and then we will get there. But if you can please not comment in the question and answer about your view, I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you, folks. So I am Jonathan Dorff. I am the chair of ALAP, and I'm also the moderator for this panel. And I'm going to introduce our panelists in alphabetical order. So we've got first, Peter Colley is a playwright, lyricist, and screenwriter. He is best known for his suspense plays, which have played in 33 countries in many languages, and for his musical Cagney, which ran for 540 performances in New York and was planned for London's Theatre Royal Haymarket on the West End until COVID happened. He has also worked in film and television.
Boom.
Next up, we have film and TV writer Wendy Graff, who's also an award-winning playwright whose plays have been produced nationally and internationally. She has been called a playwright whose powers of wordsmithery are just about perfect, as adept at rom-com as she is at her dark, dramatic, politically themed solo pieces, and her work speaks volumes for those who have no voice. Oliver Mayer has written over 30 plays and 2 internationally produced operas, as well as a book of poetry and 3 children's books, which I did not know about you, and which I think is awesome. He is also an occasional screenwriter and essayist. Oliver is a tenured professor of dramatic writing at USC School of Dramatic Arts, where he is also associate dean of faculty. And last and definitely not least, David Rambo is the author of nationally produced plays, including God's Man in Texas, The Lady with All the Answers, The Icebreaker, and The Tug of War. Also, a television writer and producer for CSI, Revolution, Empire, and others. And for a full version of the bios of all the panelists, if you check the program, which Gary just posted again, you can read a full version. But we're going to jump right in. And so what I wanted to pose to each one of you is to tell us about your first production and how it came about. So we'll stick with the alphabetical order for this first time, and we'll start with Peter.
Hi. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes, you
perfectly.
can. Excellent. Excellent. Well, looking at it from the rearview mirror, I would have to say that it's a series of little connections that sort of come together that get you to that place where it's almost unexpected because from where you started. And I think for me, it started, I was always interested in the theater, but that's not what I studied at university. I don't think universities in England, you could actually study theater. You could study English and drama or something, but you couldn't study playwriting or anything. So I was at Sheffield University. I was in the drama group. I was a ham actor. I was having fun. And we did a show, and we hired in a director from the Royal Shakespeare Company to direct us. And as usual, when you're in England, after rehearsal, you go for a drink, which is great. Because after you've plied a director with several pints of good English beer, they're very receptive. And I had mentioned that I was writing a play, and would he read it? And he said, oh, sure, whatever, okay. So I sent him this thing, and he said, okay, let's talk about it. And for an hour, he just tore it to pieces. It was like, I was like, oh, right. And I made all these notes, and I said, right. And then he said, I'd like to direct it, though. And I went, oh, okay. Wow. So I went off. I did all the rewrites, that he was talking about, and it was going to be done by a theater company that was an affiliate to the university. It was sort of not quite professional, but it was a lot of university grads. So we went in there and produced it. It wasn't like a huge thing. It was at the Sheffield Drama Studio. Tickets were cheap. This was a long time ago, but it was a big hit. And some of the local papers and actually one national paper happened to be going by, and they called me promising. And I went, ooh, promising. I'll take that. The trouble was, as soon as the show ended, I had accepted my master's degree to do a master's degree in Canada. So I didn't have a chance to use that little review, that little production, sort of leverage onto the next level in England. But then I thought, who wants to compete with Pinter, and all those guys? So I go over to Canada. Again, I'm not studying theater. My master's degree was in geography and geology. But there was a local theater group. Well, actually, there was the biggest regional theater in Canada. And so I thought, okay, I'll take this little thing and see if I can leverage it into like a real big professional production. But I hadn't written anything. And so I went there and I just sort of pitched an idea. And they didn't like it. I gave my best sales job. And I got, nah, right, great, no. But there is a show that we'd been wanting to write, that we've been wanting to do at this theater. No one's ever written. Why don't you write that? And I go, what a good idea. It was a historical drama about a famous event. And I recalled a play I had seen while I was at Sheffield University called The Stirrings in Sheffield on a Saturday night. And it was about the uprising of the Sheffield Knife Grinders Union against the brutal conditions that they were working under, how many of them died in their 30s from sucking in all this steel dust. It was a fantastic sort of agitprop show, mixture of music and sort of Brechtian, direct to the audience stuff along with the real story. So I pitched that concept, that style, to this artistic director. And he said, well, write me 20 pages. So I wrote 20 pages. He gave me notes. I wrote some more. I said, can I write some songs? He said, oh, give it a try. So now you have to remember, I'm like 30 or 40 pages into this thing, thinking it was going to go as a workshop somewhere. This theater was 1,200 seats. It was this huge old opera house converted into a professional theater. And somebody told me, and I hadn't finished the first act, they said, "Oh, congratulations, your play is on the main stage next." What? I mean, they had smaller stages, and I thought, what? Main stage? How? But I obviously I had to finish it, and I think if I look at all the connections and I have any advice to give to anybody, it's start with every small thing that leads to another thing that leads to something slightly bigger. And then what happens, I think, what made the difference for me was that the director, who had a lot of stress on picking a show, realized that I addressed the notes and he could work with me. That I was a person who listened, a person who realized what he didn't know. And each successive draft, I would get my notes, I would address the notes in as best I could. And so they gained confidence that they could put the show on and have a certain degree of artistic control, knowing that I wouldn't go out of my mind. So I would say to any young writer today, work backstage in the theater. I mean, or act if you can in a small theater, or like I said, just work backstage. Just do anything in a theater. Learn what it looks like backstage. Learn what works and what doesn't, and slowly make connections with actors and directors, and slowly kind of work your ideas up that chain. And from a little small thing in one country, it suddenly translated into a massive career in another country altogether, and all in a period of like a year. So that's my that's my story for how I got produced the first time.
Oh, that's quite a story. Wendy,
Yes.
what's your story?
Mine's not quite as Byzantine as that.
That's okay.
I'm happy to be here to represent the women. And my story fits right into how I got produced, because for me, it all started with a theater company. And I started as an actress, and it was a theater company here in town where you were able to act in scenes during the week, or put up a piece of a play and all that. And I went from being an actress to writing things and working it out that way. And I was also a stand-up comedian for a while, so I wrote all that material and I had a place to work it out. But for my first real full-length professional production as a playwright, it started with the theater company. And that's what I would advise anyone to do. Join 1, join 2, join 3. You get an opportunity to try stuff out in a safe setting, to get feedback, to hear it, which to me is the most important thing in the development, to be able to hear it. Just seeing words on a page, you have no idea how they're going to sound. And you're making connections with actors, you're making connections with directors, you're making connections with technical people and costume designers. And what happened for me in that first production was I had written something, and it was really the first real full-length play that I had written in a long time. And I put pieces of it up, and I got actors involved, and I got a director involved, and we kept working it. And then ultimately they were like, let's do it as a production. Let's put it on our season. And I think, and for me, and I'm talking about first productions now. How I got produced in a second production is a story for later on, because I think it's a whole different thing. But be involved in a theater company, have a place to work out. So many of these theater companies now, especially since we can't be on stage, are having short play festivals on Zoom and, different ways. But do that, because that's the road. And every time you do something like that, you make connections with other artists, and then that guy goes over to a different theater company, and then they say, hey, what about your play, blah, blah, blah. Can you do a staged reading of it for us? Or what I like to do, when I have a new play, is I'll put up a staged reading and I'll invite people, and from there I make the connection. So to me, the most important thing, and how I got produced and how I continue to get produced, is through a theater company or a theater community, a writing group, etc. That's my story.
And you're sticking to it, right? Oliver?
Yes, thank you so much. It's great to be here with everybody. I kind of want to give a little bit of credit to the play that made me want to be a playwright. When I was 13 years old, my parents took me to the Taper to see Zoot Suit. And I didn't want to go at the time. I was not into it. I'm Mexican American, but I had too much testosterone in my body and full of acne and full of fire. I just didn't want to be there. And as soon as the lights went down, my life changed. So Valdez, in a lot of ways, made me feel that I could do this. And really, only a scant 4 years or 5 years later, I found myself actually, as Peter, I was in England. I was at Oxford. And it was not a great time to be an American at Oxford. It was Reagan had just been reelected. Americans were very unpopular. And I had a hard time making friends. And so one way I did it was just I auditioned for something, got to throw a sword across the stage. And I was writing something. So I wrote, and the first play was, it was funny because the first play was a failure. I was in a competition with other plays. I remember the quote was that it was intellectual masturbation. It was also about Machiavelli. And it's so weird that I wrote a play about Machiavelli when I was, whatever that is, in teens still. 30 years later, I got to write the play about Machiavelli that's been done a few times, a play called Fortune is a Woman. So in a lot of ways, it was a gestation. And it was also really important, I think, for me to take some tough, get some tough response. Because immediately I got back on the horse and I wrote a second play that ended up getting done and getting reviewed. So that I came back to this country a produced playwright. And of course, my head was this big. Slowly come back to a decent size. So yeah, it was, and I think you lay the road through these experiences. Like I can draw a straight line from 13 to now, and I'm 55. And I can also tell you that some of the mistakes I made probably left me where I am. And the way that I treated people, not knowing how to really be in the theater yet, that I was so young and so green, they were hard lessons to learn. And now that I'm a professor, I'm able to pass them along. Don't do what I did. I tell my students all the time.
That's great. I'm going to come back to how to be in the theater later. I think that's actually a really interesting just point that people miss sometimes, is sort of because it is an ecosystem, and in the same way when you're talking about being part of a theater company, a community, I think that there is something really important in that. But let's hear from David with your first production story.
Well, there are a couple first production stories.
Well, let's hear them both.
The very, very first one I'll dispose of quickly because I was 15 years old. It had the summer that I was 14. I acted during the summer in a Pottstown, Pennsylvania, YWCA summer theater program. They had the Y was a beautiful building, and my family had a little history with it. I found out later that my grandfather, my age, 14, 15, drove a wagon that delivered pies to they then had a cafeteria at the Y. And here I was many years later acting in The Drunkard or The Fallen Saved. It was a melodrama. And I was pleased with it. And, I liked the script, liked my part, liked everybody I was working with. But I really thought I could write a better play. And I spent the next couple of months working on, of course, a big musical with dancers and lots of characters and elements directly stolen from every musical movie I'd seen on TV that I loved. and took it to the Y, and I said, can we do my show next summer? And they said, oh, of course, it's such a relief that we've got something, because we can't decide what to do, but they could all agree on my play. And I had, just as everybody else has talked about, there was an infrastructure that supported that. There were kids and there was something of an audience. By the way, when my grandfather came to see it, and he loved it, he told me that the pies he delivered were made by Mrs. Smith. It later became Mrs. Smith's Pie Company, her little business. So I felt like I was playing a part in Pottstown, Pennsylvania history with my little musical. It was 27 years before I had another production of something that I'd written. And I self-produced it with my husband here, first at the Zephyr Theater on Melrose, and it was very successful. I've been working as a real estate agent, writing plays in my off hours and at open houses that nobody was coming into. And I wrote a play about 3 real estate agents based on a disastrous series of transactions that I had been involved with. And we sold out. We pushed the equity agreement, when there was one, to the limit to get so many performances, and our actors loved it. The audiences loved it. We moved down the street to the Matrix when the Zephyr had a new tenant. It was very successful, a lot of fun. It got a rave in the LA Times, which is to this day my only good review in the Los Angeles Times, but I'm so grateful for it. It's framed on the wall around the corner from where I'm seated. But you know what made me get my first professional production was I wrote a producible play. I hadn't learned that yet. You can produce when it's your own thing with 8 to 14, 15 characters, all these epics I'd been writing, comedy and drama. But I had at that point an agent in New York. She said, David, I can't place anything. Unless you write a big political play or something about an issue that is just changing our lives in this moment, I can't place any of these, despite, liking the writing. So I wrote a 3-character play, and I didn't really set out to write it as a producible play. I started writing it with many more characters. But I was, as Oliver was inspired by a play in his story, I was inspired by a play called Old Wicked Songs that I saw by John Marins that I saw at the Gethem. And it was just 2 actors, but they created the entire city of Vienna and all of their lives just by the skill of the writing and the skill of the direction and the acting and the design. And I thought, what is the fewest number of characters I can tell this story with? This play, by the way, I'm talking about God's Man in Texas, and I came down with 2 of them. It wasn't working with 2. I needed a 3rd character. I really felt that need. And once I did, this is a play about competing Baptist preachers in a megachurch. And I realized I had now had a Father, a Son, and a Holy Ghost. The whole structure of the play came together. It just flew out of me on far too many pages. It was cut way down later. But my agent said, I can place this. And she sent it to the Humana Festival. It was John Jory's next to last year running the Actors Theater of Louisville. And, I'm ever grateful to him. It gave me a career and a life. So I wrote a producible play.
Which I think is a really interesting, because you all have touched on some really interesting issues, and I want to, before we kind of jump to one of our other topics, I kind of want to come back to a few things. So I think that since you finished with that, David, we'll this idea of I wrote a producible play, to what extent does that guide you, influence your thinking? Because we hear that a lot, and it's certainly depending on which part of the theater you're writing for, that's a thing. And how did you learn that? When you're writing now, what kind of goes through your mind in terms of that, does that mantra for other panelists, does that influence you at all? Take it and run with it.
Well, I had a very interesting experience with, I had written a sort of political drama, historical. I was very proud of it. And it got produced and it got excellent reviews from, national newspapers and everything. And I could not get a second production. I think to date, it's the only play of mine that ever didn't get a second production, especially when I looked at the reviews. I went, what's wrong? And this was a while back. And the theaters were sort of telling me, "Oh, we don't do costume dramas anymore." Hello, Hamilton. Huh? But in those days, they said, "No, it's too costumey." And I said, "Yeah, but it's about some real issues of the early settlements. This was up in Canada, and all the abuses of the early settlers." I said, "It's good stuff, and we've got nice reviews." And they went, "No." So the following winter, I call it my winter of discontent. I was brooding. My promising career was now on the skids. I was running out of money. I was living in my mother-in-law's basement. I was approaching 30. It was like, oh my God, I'm going to die here. And then I thought, well, screw them. I'm going to write a 4-character modern play with one set, you bastards. And I wrote it in a fit of pique, to say the least. And I kind of shot it out there. I think that the producers were a little surprised when they saw it, and they go, "Oh," because they commissioned it. The theater that had done the same historical show the year before had commissioned me to do a new one, and so I went on with a producible play. It had comedy, it had drama, it had a theme, of women's empowerment sort of hidden in it, and kaboom! It just like took off, and that was the play that has been done all over the world, and it's been done almost constantly since I first wrote it.
Just midnight.
Almost 40 years ago. It's just out there. But it's also ruined my life, because another topic you brought up is setbacks. Setbacks is being pegged as a person who writes a certain type of show. And, for the first 8 or 10 years of my writing career, I was dogged because I'd written this big hit, my very first play I mentioned before, called The Donnellys, which was about this family in the sort of the wild, crazy West. And that's how they always introduced me. Oh, the guy who wrote and from that day forth, I was always introduced as the guy who wrote I'll Be Back Before Midnight. I go, I do other stuff, people. I've got musicals and dramas and all sorts of things. But it's very hard when you've had a very successful show to be thought of as a different kind of writer. So that's one of the setbacks I ran into.
Yeah, Wendy, it looks like you want to chime in there.
Yeah, I think it's a very bad idea to try to think about, how do I write a producible play? I think that and I'm building on what Mara said earlier, and I'm building upon what Stephen Sondheim said in Sunday in the Park with George. Let it come from you, and then it will be new. If you try to emulate what they're looking for, or you try to think about what are they looking for, and that sort of thing, I think it's not going to be fresh. It's going to be derivative. It's probably not going to be a success. I learned so much from my mentor, the late Gordon Davidson. I mean, he directed a play of mine. It was the only play that he directed after he left Center Theater Group. And being with him for like 2 years, writing 800 drafts of this play, having him call me in the middle of the night with a new idea, and, always putting, when he called me, urgent, but, and I know you're probably laughing because you've probably been through that as well. And one of the things that he said over and over and over again is, don't try to emulate anybody else's work. Don't try to guess what they're looking for, because by the time you finish it and you send it in, they're looking for something else. So I have held, and it has held me in very good stead. And there's been times when I've written things that, I've brought in and people have said, oh, we can't do that. That's way too controversial. And our subscribers won't go for that and everything. But honestly, it only takes one yes. And there's a place for something that's fresh and that comes from your heart and that comes from you. And just in my opinion and in my experience only, I say, let it come from you, and then it'll be new.
To clarify, I think, David, when you're talking about producible, I think you meant more logistically producible. Did I understand that correctly?
Absolutely. I didn't set out to write a producible play. I set out to write the strongest play coming from my heart and believe me, my deep soul as I could. I was not imitating old wicked song. I was inspired by the richness that cutting away all the extraneous stuff that I was so fond of throwing in. It's like a stew with about 9 too many vegetables. That was my experience there, and it happened to be what people might have called at the time a producible play. I should also say the Humana Festival at Actors Theatre of Louisville is still going on. It's underwritten by the Humana Foundation year after year after year. That was I believe the 23rd festival in 1999. So it's, in its over 40 years now. It's been bringing playwrights like Marcia Norman, Beth Henley, Richard Dresser, Naomi Uzuka, Anne Bogart, and of course the very mysterious Jane Martin, to their new work to the theater. I was just thrilled to be in the company, and they happened to have 3 actors who were their favorites, who just fit these 3 roles so well, and it was they saw it as a lark, really, for their people. I had no idea it was the beginning of a career. I was just so thrilled to have a full equity production where I got a real advance, and they asked my opinion on sets and costumes and designers and things. I was thrilled and ever grateful.
John, just let me really quickly say, I think that's really important too, is, whenever anyone gets you a production, whether it's on the main stage, whether it's in front of 1,200 people or 40 people, I mean, it's a bit of a miracle. And particularly we know it now, as just about everything is shuttered and will be until into the second, third quarter of next year. So that's something I think everybody needs to understand out there, is that it's always a success if someone is even reading your stuff, much less deciding to do something with it.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. Well, and let's talk about that. So, I mean, we are at kind of this really kind of inflection point in the theater, or maybe it's I don't want to call it a pause point, because it's sort of interesting to see what's happening out there. As you probably all know, mostly write for young people, and we're seeing a lot of virtual productions. And I'm kind of wondering what your experience has been. March happened. And, we heard a little from Peter. Peter, you certainly had some things in the works that got delayed or are less in the works, to put it nicely. But what have other people's experiences been of this pandemic? And certainly Mara talked about it a bit this morning. And because now How I Got Produced has a very different meaning than it might have had a year ago. And so, Oliver, maybe, I don't know if you want to start with it.
Well, I could grieve. I have something when the Wallace reopens. I'm online to have something at the Wallace, and I'm very happy. They don't do a lot of original pieces, or haven't to this point, but they're going to do mine. I'm very pleased. So a lot of things change. It's an original, and it's about LA. It's actually about the building that I live in, that I'm on the Zoom call right now.
Oh, wow.
It has a history and a slight reference to Paul Revere Williams, the great architect of Los Angeles. But because I'm a professor, I'm involved all the time on Zoom, and we're doing a lot of productions on Zoom with our students. A little earlier, I heard you talking about Zaria O'Neill. One of the best young writers in the city happens to be my student. I'm so proud of her.
Oh, yay.
She was my undergraduate, and now she's still going through the graduate program from the British Virgin Islands. She has so much to give, and she's part of something now. And in honor of Gordon Davidson, we are calling this project, back in the 70s, he had something called New Theater for Now, which was awfully good. We're doing New Theater for Right Now. And the idea really is to take the moment, the elections, the pandemic, the protests, and just put it out there. We're finding that Zoom, of course, is limited. There are other engines that one can use, and there are ways to Dr. Zoom. And I'm the last person to know how to do any of that, but I'm really happy to know people who do it. So I'd so urge people who are listening to get on Zoom and do some plays. There's Versus Theater in town with Johnny. Lots of play readings are happening on a weekly basis. It's wonderful. But honestly, all it takes, we could do a play right now. We could all get together and do Wendy's next play, and it would be really, really amazing. I don't know. Could you cast it amongst us? And,
Definitely.
so there it is. In a
I'll
lot of
play
ways,
the-
this
I'll
is
play
a
the
great
villain.
reboot. It's an incredible reboot for everybody because we can do this. You guys can do it who are listening, and actually, you remind us. Wow, let's turn off the TV and get back to work.
I think that it's also, I've done a number of things now, and we started out where it was really the Wild West, and there weren't any guidelines or anything. I know a lot of theaters, the Dramatist Guild, and that's another thing. Join Dramatist Guild, join ALAP. But Dramatist Guild has now put together some guidelines because, for example, I had somebody want to do something and they said, oh, well, we're just putting it up indefinitely. And maybe if somebody sees, no, you're not putting it up indefinitely. You're not paying anybody. You're not using a link to get through to it. But anyway, so the first thing that I did was I did a play, a two-hander of mine that had been done on stage, and we did it as an experiment. How does it does it even translate from stage to Zoom? And honestly, I have to tell you, I was so surprised. It was the best experience, not for the finished product necessarily, but it allowed me to look at these characters with such a laser focus. When you put something up a full production, you're worried about the whole gestalt. You're worried about the set, and you're worried about the blocking and all that. But this was just about the characters, and I learned so much more about the characters. In fact, I said, "Gosh, I wish the play wasn't published because I've learned so many new things about the characters." And there's a lot of groups that have been doing some really great work. Now, it has been short stuff, but like LA Together, I had something in LA Together last week. That was a terrific experience. I've had something commissioned that we're going into rehearsal tomorrow with Lower Depth Theater Ensemble. It's a great group of artists and really kind of opened me up. The prompt was like a science fiction thing, science fiction and voter suppression. And I was like, oh, I can't do that. I don't write that. But I pushed myself. I was like, well, what am I doing? I'm just sitting in my room anyway. I had 4 productions canceled this year. And I think there's a lot of positive stuff about what's going on online right now. If not for the end result of, it's going to go up on Broadway next year, but to stretch yourself as a writer and to make those connections, like you were saying, and all these places, Louisville, all these places are all looking for stuff where you can make more connections. And I think that there's some positive things that are coming out of it.
Sure. Peter and David, how are you handling the 2020?
Peter, you first.
Well, actually, it's actually been a good year for me. Luckily, the end of the year, I contacted all my agents and said, don't send me any more royalties until January, because I said I'm going to get killed by taxes and next year doesn't look as good. So I just wanted to shunt the money over. And it's interesting, my Polish agent said, no, we have to do it in our calendar year. Our bookkeeper will go crazy. And I said, well, can you send it at 11 o'clock on December the 31st? Because they wire it, right? And they said, oh, we could do that. And it didn't arrive into my bank account until January the 3rd. So I go, yes, that's perfect. So January and February were like, great, I got all these royalties, almost enough to tide me over for the year. And then the sky fell in. And so at least I had the buffer of, a little bit of sort of cash. And then we're still working on this musical, this Cagney musical, for London and then hopefully Broadway. So we got a new director, a Tony Award-winning director who I love working with. And all of a sudden, it's like a whole new project. I know the show's run for like 500 performances in New York, but I never liked the way it was. But I couldn't seem to get the powers that be to help me change it. So that's been really exciting. Working, it gives you hope. As long as you've got hope, you can get through almost anything, The bombs could be falling around, but as long as you say, oh boy, this is going to be so good when, the fog lifts and the sky gets blue again, it's hope. It's as long as you've got hope, life is good. And also, for the first time ever in my life, because I've always been self-employed playwright, all my money has come from royalties. I have never received unemployment in my life. And thank you, PUA, the pandemic, whatever it is. I'm getting this check every week. It's like, oh, hey, can we just keep this going for like another year or two? Not if Trump gets back in, obviously. So yeah, it's actually been fine. Gardening, working on stuff. It's been cool, but enough already. Yes.
Let's hope. So.
I had a surprisingly wonderful experience with online theater as this evolves. I have to tell you though, if there's any moment when I lose hope, as Peter was just talking about, when it's so hard to get, it's when I just and I don't mean to be dramatic, but it's really true. I mourn that I cannot go to the theater sometimes. I just mourn it. It's been so much a part of my life. It's the thing that got me off the farm in Pennsylvania. It got me here, it got me New York, got me everywhere where I had ever dreamed of going. And I just love that experience of breathing the common air, as Anne Bogart puts it, between actors and an audience. I miss it so terribly. And my first few experiences with Zoom theater were very unsatisfying because I was expecting it to fill that gaping wound, and there's no way it possibly could have. But then I began to accept it on its own terms, and I found it far, far, far more satisfying as its own form. It's new forms. Treplow screaming new forms. Well, here's a new form. It's been forced on us by a pandemic, and we have to embrace it and make it be something that's wonderful. There's something called the No Pants Theater that my friend Jason Weiss put up, and he did a reading of a play I had just started sending out, just finished it. Maybe a play I care more deeply about than anything I've ever written, and we had just started sending it out when this all hit, and I thought, I'll never get to hear this play. In fact, developmental readings were canceled at a couple of theaters across the country, and I was just, my heart broke. And then Jason said, let's do this. I think it'd be fun. And it was great because not only did I get to hear my play, which I hadn't been able to do yet, I got to, in a sense, experience it. Not really see it, but experience it. And it was in a format that allowed people all around the country to also be part of, in that moment, which is hard to do when you're live in one little theater. So that was great. And I've had another play, an old play that, the plays have this royalty curve. Maybe not if they're written by Peter Colley, but if they're written by David Rambo, I assure you, there is that blush where, let's all do this play, and then there's that is so 10 years ago, and we're not doing it anymore. Well, one of those is a solo play about the advice columnist Ann Landers, and yes, I've had
great play.
Thank you. I've had productions, virtual productions, since this thing happened, because either they have a woman who sits at her desk and looks into her laptop and performs it, or in the case of the Cinnabar Theater up in Petaluma, and I think one other, they actually did a full production. They hired designers. People got to work again. They hired designers. They had a director. They brought camera operators in, and they they did a whole video capture of it without an audience, of course, but because it was just one actor, they could be very COVID safe, and I hear it did really well for them. I'm thrilled. So now I'm embracing.
I'm sure people
Yeah.
were so starving to have art but that in a way, when you talk about the producible play, that is a play that for this moment is an eminently producible play because logistically, the art it brings is obviously the art that you bring as the writer, but it's a play that meets this moment. Which seems like a term. We've heard Gavin Newsom use that term over and over again, meet the moment. But it's interesting, and I want to just so something that Wendy said, talking about to stretch yourself as a writer, talking about this new time, and you were talking about this new form, and it's really interesting because when this happened, and there are lots of sort of internet groups with playwrights, and you get some people who are sort of very set in their ways and they want to say, well, this isn't theater. And then you have some people say, well, it's film. And but it's kind of somewhere in between. And like all of you have sort of worked, kind of in all these different media. And what is this form that we're experiencing? And what makes it kind of interesting to you? I've stumped the panel.
No, I think we're all being polite.
I
would just say
you're too nice.
I think that's pretty much what I was just talking about. But I think it comes down to two things. It's how many Zoom windows are open. If it's the solo play, it's just one window is open, and I think that experience of engagement with the play and the viewer is pretty powerful. If it's multiple windows, you run the risk of constantly being reminded that you're not in a theater. And you have to kind of push that away, just listen to the play, let the play come through. It's not impossible, it's a little bit more of a challenge, that's all.
That means David Rambo is telling you to write monologue solo shows. You heard it here.
It should be said that. Go ahead. Go ahead, Peter, please.
No, I was just saying that in terms of these small shows, which are perfect for Zoom too, but actually even in Canada, where it's been very strict lockdown, they've started productions where it's a husband and wife acting team, a two-hander. The one that my friend just saw was at the Aurelia Opera House, which is like 700 or 800 seats. They put in 25% audience, in their little bubbles. And apparently everyone said, it was a sort of almost theater experience, as in the old days, since a lot of our shows don't get full anyway. So, there were small beginnings. I haven't actually seen a Zoom version of any of my shows. I got a request for one. We had to turn it down because the film rights had been sold to that play, and I thought, I suspect that's going to cross some contract or other, so I had to say no. But the ones I've seen on television, this thing about the shows must go on, where they have the filmed versions. Some of those are pretty good, but that's not quite the same thing as we're dealing with, because the archives are going to run dry very soon. Of old filmed shows. But I do feel that if we could get the technology right, you could almost do a 2 or 3, 4-hander quite well on Zoom if they kind of merge the different cameras and stuff. I've heard technicians are working on that thing for the future. So, they can do almost anything technologically today, so you never know.
I think the technology is getting better, and indeed, Zoom is not the only game in town. So that is something also to think about. But one thing that's obvious but can be said at this moment is now we can do plays where somebody's in the Bronx and someone else is in Florida. I was doing a cross-country trip with my wife this summer to where father wasn't well, and we had to do a workshop and was able to do it in hotel rooms over 2 or 3 days. And our actors were all over the place. I'm doing something with USC in March with Visions and Voices about Ruben Salazar, the great journalist who was killed 50 years ago, LA Times journalist. And our actors include David Zayas, who's not leaving New York, and people in various cities that aren't, so we can do that. And so we need to embrace that. And those ways that we talk about bringing the world together, well, we literally are.
Yeah, no, I think that's amazing that there are opportunities, and maybe in the way, Peter, you're talking about hope, that we have to see this, at least look for grounds for optimism, and so there is something amazing about being able to work with actors, for example, that you wouldn't normally get to work with, to have casts who could really be all over the world at this point. And I think for me, we have we publish at my company, we publish an adaptation of Whirligig, Paul Fleischman's novel, and the character goes to all 4 different, a whole bunch of different states to build these whirligigs, and the author's dream is to have casts do those scenes who are actually in those particular states, and so I'm kind of hoping that we can make that happen for him, because I think that would be a really interesting event. One thing that is probably maybe easier in the Zoom world is this idea of self-production, which was something that we touched on a little earlier. And I think that David, I don't know that I knew that you had self-produced a play before, because I always think of you, God's Man in Texas, and all those things that happened after. But it's kind of cool to know that you did that. And Wendy, I think you have self-produced quite a bit. And on Oliver and Peter, I don't know if you have self-produced.
Well, not quite a bit.
I self-produced once. I was 7 years old. I was at an air base in the UK, and I had read this thing in a book about how to create a shadow puppet theater. So I did, and I invited all the kids in this area, it was known as Officers' Married Quarters, to come. And there'd be cookies and stuff, and we naturally packed the house. I did my puppet show. Everyone seemed to like it, but it cost me all my pocket money. So after that, I said, no more self-producing. That's it's too expensive. But the cardboard and the wax paper and the figures was just exorbitant. But you know what? I have a great admiration for people who do, and I think that's quite a viable thing. Just don't do it when you're 7.
So what has your experience been, Wendy?
It's a big continuum. I've had a couple of times when I've co-produced, and what I've ended up doing was I made a donation to a theater company, and I kind of augmented. There was one time, though, that I did self-produce, and it was a play that I felt very, very passionate about, that I'd been working on for a long time, and it looked like it was going to be picked up by a particular theater company in town. And then they started jacking me around. And they said, we don't like the ending. Can you soften the ending? And can you this? And can you that? And some of our people on our board, it was a very highly controversial play. It asked some very tough questions about Israel. And they got scared. And then finally we said, you know what? My husband said this. He said, let's just do it ourselves, and you can do it the right way. And we were lucky enough that we could afford to do it. We, of course, lost tons of money on it. But if you're going to self-produce, you should form a production company, and then you can take like 40% loss on your taxes. So it's really only a half, losing everything you have. But yeah, it's been that time when when I was pushed to the wall, and it was something that I believed in, and I loved the actors, and I loved the director, and I just couldn't make those kind of changes. And somebody had told me once, I went to them and I said, when you buy the painting, you don't ask the artist to change the colors to match your living room. You either buy the painting or you don't buy the painting. And I have passed on things before, but this time I just felt so strongly. There was one other time that I did something on a shoestring, and it was one actress. It was a tiny little theater. Nobody took a fee, and it ended up winning the GLAD Award, and it's my most produced play. So there you go.
Never know. I mean,
You
yeah.
never know.
Because I mean, there are a lot of playwrights who really do like to go that route, and I guess it can be freeing, and especially now it can be freeing. It sounds like David, yours was fairly successful.
It was very successful.
Yeah.
We made a profit.
Wow.
And we were, believe me, we gave the actors, this is before the recent equity agreement, this is, some time ago, but we gave the actors, I think, 3 or 4 times what the minimum under that contract was. I mean, we were really good to everybody. We actually gave them the rental fee on their clothes. You're supposed to give them so much per week for cleaning and rental under equity laws and rules. And one of the actors, a couple of them said, what's this for? I never got this before. Well, we were very good because we were selling, when you're selling out, and it was a fair ticket price too. We shared the bounty, and then we took what we had made and actually did an archival video of the play so that we could all have it. We used it to have a really good pay a real film crew to come in, a video crew, and do it, and let our director do the editing, so she was able to. It was her edit, not somebody else's, and I'm awfully glad that we did that. It's a moment in time that we captured. I don't know that I can't afford to self-produce today under the equity rules. I don't know who can. It's very tough. This is why what Wendy was talking about earlier and others, it is so important to have a community, to have a theater community, to be part of a group, because you have to get insurance, you've got to pay the rent, the overhead, and if you were working with a group that already has all of that in place, it just makes it so much easier. And then you can do things like make the big contribution that makes your play possible, and sort of share the burden as well as the rewards that way. I should mention, I did self-produce another time with 9 other people. We got together. I don't know why I forgot this. Paula Vogel did one of her intensives out here, and it was for ASK Theater Projects. Some of you may remember them. They're fantastic.
May they rest in peace.
Oh, God, they were so great to me. I owe so much to them. And for 12, Paula took 12 playwrights for 8 days and gave us basically her 3-year Brown MFA program in those 8 days. It was so intense and so wonderful.
Wow.
But she said to us on the last day, and this goes toward what Wendy was talking about earlier, and Oliver and Peter, is that if circles rise together, if you commit to one another, not just take, you've got to commit, you got to give too, everyone in the circle will rise. And we started meeting after those 8 days once a month to share pages and do what playwrights groups do. We decided to write some of these, some short plays and produce them over 3 nights in 3 programs. We rented the Zephyr, and I think I shouldered, I had a kind of a bonanza year that year, so I thought I'll be the big guy. I'll put some of this back into this. But we got our own directors and props and productions rehearsal, and we came together, and it was just wonderful. It was great. I highly recommend not doing it alone.
I think that makes sense. Oliver, do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Just that I haven't self-produced since I got married to my wife, and we had her family come in. She's a great actress, those who don't know her. Anyway, I wrote her a part, and her family was coming in from New York and Florida, New Jersey, and so we got a disco club on Hollywood Boulevard, and we put up a cabaret. And we had a great time, and we lost about over $10,000, but it was a lot of fun. It was a big party, and everybody had great. It was really big fun, and we didn't realize we were losing money until after it was over. So I'm a lousy businessman, and I probably won't do it again. But it was a great wedding gift.
I was going to say that enabled you to have a good time was because you did not know that you were losing so much money at
I didn't have that money
point.
to lose. Let me tell you, I earned the least amount, I'm sure, among the group here as a playwright.
I just
I've
remember
shaded it well on earning next to nothing for years.
the worst thing about self-producing was that you have access to the audience every week, from the ticket agency, and it's like Thursday and 3 people have signed up, and it's like watching the stock market every single day. That's the part I hate. I don't want to do that anymore ever again. I just want to let somebody else do that, because you're watching them get Gold Star, and there's only 3 people signed up for Friday night and all that. I think that's the worst part about self-producing.
Yeah.
That was definitely a difficult part about just producing in general, I think, is that's the horror, is looking at those numbers and thinking, wow, do we need a paper? Do we, who do we call? So the actors are not outnumbering the audience. But that can be a challenging thing. But I think, as you said, there are a lot of really potential upsides to self-producing as well. And if there's something that you feel passionate about, it does make sense if it's not getting out there in some other way. Also, I want to remind the audience at this point that we are going to take some questions if there's time permitting. So open up that Q&A feature in the sort of the bottom, should be the bottom line of your screen, and if you want, and add them in there, and I will funnel pass any questions to the panelists. So one of the things that came up earlier that we were going to talk about are setbacks, because sometimes we bounce back from them. Sometimes it's kind of you have to be really creative in the way that you overcome them. And so what are some of the problems that you've run into? Because it's always great when we get produced, but sometimes we run into challenges on the way, and sometimes even after they say yes, it turns out not to be what we thought we signed up for. And what kinds of things have you run into in your career? I don't know, whoever would like to start. So I see.
I can share a nightmare story.
I love nightmares, as long as they're in the rear view and you're not living it now.
And it breaks my heart to actually tell the story because I loved everybody involved, but it was just a matter of really bad communication on everybody's part, I think. I wrote a play. Actually, it was commissioned by Actors Theatre of Louisville. And then they had a change in leadership, and the new leader, wanted to, of course, bring in his own playwrights and everything. And so that happens. And you'd sort of take your play and think, well, someone else will do it. It was hard to get people to do it, but it was this sort of crackling, almost surreal kind of comedy, and it dealt with some themes that were really relevant then. It's like 10 years ago, and very relevant still today, even more relevant in my own life, which is interesting. And a theater, I really don't want to say which one it is, because with the internet, people can figure out anything. But this theater wanted to give me a full equity world premiere. It was a terrific theater. Really love the people who run the theater. Love the theater itself, just physically. I loved it, and the audiences who come there, I would travel there, and it was a trip to see productions, and I was thrilled. Well, we did a read through. They did a reading there that they loved. Everybody laughed. It was just landed. So the comedy, everything worked. I get to the first rehearsal. Not the first rehearsal I was able to attend, which is about 3 or 4 days in. And I discover this little 90-minute crackler is taking 2 hours and 20 minutes just to read. It's intermissionless, and it's dreary. It's tragic. Apparently, the director related to the themes in terms of his own life and a tragic experience he had had, and wanted to express that through my little crackling comedy. So it was, crackling comedy transmuted through Eugene O'Neill 4-act tragedy. And as it went on, nothing was working. The leading actor never quite memorized the lines. I wasn't changing much. The tech was one of the most disastrous things I've ever endured, and took like 3 days to tech a 90-minute play. And I thought, you know what? This will just be over, and I'll go on. And it's in the hands of the actors. The humiliation that I have suffered is over. Wrong. They invited major critics who showed up. And it's like the one thing you never want anyone to see, they saw. Not that there weren't moments that were lovely and wonderful, but that was a setback that in some ways I've never recovered from when I think of that play. My agent called me the next morning. She was in New York. She looked at a few mornings when the review appeared in our local paper, and she said, "Whatever you do, do not read the paper today. Never look at this review. It's irrelevant, doesn't mean anything. It's not about the play you wrote. Just don't go there." And I never have. It took me a long time to write a play after that. I'll tell you, that was a setback.
Yeah.
I think we would have a whole new panel discussion called "Pulling the Plug." Yes or no? Because I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm pretty sure that you've probably all had the experience of, should I pull the plug? And when you have pulled the plug, it's devastating. But when you've left the plug in, it's devastating. So that's a challenge.
Yeah, it never occurred to me in that situation, Wendy, because I just thought I don't want to, all these people, they raised so much money to do this. They're all working, so everybody's getting paid. I really thought it would be, if not for them inviting all the critics, that was the killer. But
did you sit down with the director and say, it's not working?
All the time. But he kept telling me
Wow.
sad stories about his family and how that related. And yes, and no.
Softie.
Don't worry. I'll do what you want. It's not what I feel, but I'll do what you want. And then, we'd get in rehearsal and he wouldn't. And the poor actors, I mean, they were whips. I finally pulled myself out of the process because the actors were going nuts. Here's the playwright, here's the director. I just thought no one will know. And sadly, everybody knows.
That's a terrible story.
Yeah.
I want to give you a hug. You hear that?
A Zoom hug.
A Zoom hug. What other setbacks?
Actually,
Yeah.
Well, I have sort of the classic setback story in the sense that you develop a relationship with a theater, often with the artistic director, whoever he or she is, and it's wonderful. And you're talking about the new play that you've been commissioned to write for next season, and life is wonderful. And then one day, the director comes running into a meeting that you're supposed to be having and says, "I can't talk with you now. I'm fighting for my life." And I go, "What do you mean?" He says, "They're trying to fire me, the bastards." And then he rushed out of the room, slammed the door. And sure enough, the board of directors wanted to bring in a famous director, artistic director. It was Robin Phillips. I'm not sure if you know the guy from Stratford. This is way back. And so suddenly, as soon as there's a new artistic director in a theater, they're like feudal castles. All of the old people are out. All of their friends of the new artistic director come in. Your wonderful project, which would have fit the theater perfectly, it might be great, but you're gone. And you have to start all over again to establish a new relationship with a new theater. And even though you've got all these credits and stuff, it's kind of lonely. We're all talking about having a community, like a theater or theaters that we sort of have a relationship with. And then suddenly to lose the one at that time was the only one I had, and it was the most powerful one. And suddenly find yourself out kind of on the ice floe, all alone. It's a bit daunting. But luckily, shortly after that, I was approached by another theater company that was tiny. It was just starting out. They said, "Listen, we know you're kind of been working for the big theater." I didn't really want to tell them that I wasn't. But they said, would you write a play for us? And they were all so humble. It's such a little theater. I go, yes. Yes. less because I didn't have anything else to do, it turned out. Well, that little theater then grew to become one of the country's top producing theaters of new plays. They won tons of awards. And I was sort of there in their second year. And that was a matter of, and that relationship's still there to this day. And that was 30 odd years ago. So, you know, you can always find another theater. That's the joy of theater, is there's thousands of them. And they're all over the world. And you can find a group that you enjoy their work and their mindset and their people, and you can develop your stuff there. Whereas in Movie Town, we've got like a few big studios, and that was it. So you can always keep moving. There's lots of theater out there.
I when Mara was speaking and she was talking about finding your, being true to yourself and everything, I couldn't help but think, and this kind of goes with what we've all been talking about, certainly your story, David, and an experience that I had. I think that when you're kind of more at the beginning of your career, you're so happy to be produced that things are niggling at you, but you go, well, they're doing my play, and this is my big shot, and all that. And I think that I wish that I would have known then what I know now, and I wish that I would have belonged to the Dramatists Guild, and I wish that I would have known about that wall of protection and everything. And then I would have been more willing to walk away. And it's sad when you walk away, but like I had this one, I was finally going to get to New York. This was it. I was finally getting to New York. And I didn't realize in those days that there's problems with developing a new play when you're in Los Angeles and it's happening in New York. And, you think, oh, well, I'll just go for the first table read and the casting, and then I'll come back, for previews. And meanwhile, the director, who's not answering my emails, is cutting up the scenes and shifting them around. Yeah, I went nuts, but I was like, oh my God, it's in New York, and I can't give this up. And I was like up all night, with my writing group here, saying, let me do it myself. I was having conversations with the artistic director, and at the end, it just blew up, and it was bound to blow up from the first day, and it never went up. And that was a huge setback. It broke my heart. It took me a long time to say to myself, okay, I need to make my goal to do really good work with really good people and forget I got to go to New York.
Sean,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Rather than recount the multiple scars, which is fun to do. And if this was the cocktail hour, we're almost there. And, we could play a drinking game over this. I think I got you all beat. But rather than do that, what I'd say is I think the point is that life in the theater is a series of setbacks. And that is in a certain way how you survive. And the point is your resilience when the world hits you across the face. And you don't have to be Jesus. You don't have to turn the other cheek. Maybe you have to be a good boxer. You sort of have to bob and weave. But you got to do something. And maybe the best thing you can do is to keep going with a kind of open heart. And if you can, with open arms. So the point here is, in order to survive, I think as a person, much less as a playwright, you have to take the inevitable setback and find a way to learn something and to keep that little flame alive. And that's the most essential thing I can give, as a professor and for myself, to remember, both remember and then still try to have that kind of innocence. I guess that's youth. I guess that was 13-year-old me at Zoot Suit. And in a lot of ways, it's the 55-year-old me just knowing that despite all the setbacks, I found my wife in the theater. I have made a lot of money occasionally in the theater. I got a lot more to write. And some of those pieces that were set back 10, 20 years ago have a way to find a new life in a few years. You just got to live long enough.
Yeah.
So don't get COVID. I think that's the moral of the story. We've had a few audience questions come in, and I thought maybe we could address those. So one of them, David, came up after something that you said, and the question was: it said David mentioned that he had an agent before he had a play produced. How does that work?
Oh boy, an agent's not an easy thing to get anymore, but because so few of them really still work outside of a handful, and they represent the rock stars. Because it's just hard to make a living in any part of the theater, let alone make a living off 10% of what somebody's making in the theater. But I was fortunate in that I pursued some agents. I never asked someone, "Can you recommend me to your agent?" My upbringing wouldn't allow me to do that, but I would ask people, "Can you think of agents an unproduced playwright who might be open to reading an unproduced playwright?" And I hit the jackpot with a woman named Mary Harden in New York, who's my agent to this day, 25 some years later. I just pursued it. I wrote letters. I asked if they would read a few pages. There was a wonderful old Asian woman named Helen Merrill who famous for being willing to read anything you sent.
Yes.
And she would write back in the margins of your cover letter. She wouldn't even use her own stationery to send your play back to you. And you had to send an envelope with the postage so it could come back. It's pre-email. But I took encouragement from all those. And agents don't really want to hear from unproduced people, but every playwright who's produced was unproduced at one time and got someone to listen. So you just have to keep trying, see who they represent, see what productions they've been able to set up, and go after them.
I remember Helen Merrill. And
Was she great?
Yeah, she was. I think she was actually William Alfred's agent. She was my professor at Harvard. And I remember Bridget Aschenberg, who was, another one. And I still remember her requesting something and obviously hating it beyond all human control, and basically writing me a note saying, this is trash. Thank you for sending it. But you're right. There aren't those same number of sort of old time theater agents that there used to be. Because I guess it's a different ballgame out there. But in some ways, probably outside of that maybe those lower tiers and Broadway and off Broadway, there's a lot that you can do without an agent in the theater. Yeah. So we had another question. So we're talking about, are there opportunities still there to start with a tiny theater and move up? And, it seems like there are thousands of playwrights out there. And certainly I know from my experience, if you look at Official Playwrights of Facebook, which has 12,000 members, I don't know how many of them actually write plays, but there certainly are a lot. And only, it feels, continuing with the question, it seems like there are thousands of playwrights out there and only a small number of theaters. It feels so hard to get that first production, and especially if you are older. And so what advice do you give to people who are, maybe they're not, fresh out of undergrad or they're in the grad program and is it as dire as it sounds?
I don't think it's dire at all. I mean, right now there's so many theater companies. I mean, I belong to 3 of them in town, and they're always looking for new members, and they're always looking for new artists. And I don't think that there's any like. I mean, I'm old, and I'm there.
You're not old.
Well, I mean, I'm not right out of grad school. I mean. I didn't even do this right out of grad school. I started much later because I worked in film and television, and I went on that road first. But absolutely, I mean, I would tune in to watch Together LA. There's like 53 theaters that are participating in it. Go to the website. There's still like 2 more days, I think, of it. And it's got a ton of theaters listed. It lists every theater and every artistic director in town. And they're great ones. And no, I think people are always looking for new blood in their theater company, and they're always looking for someone who's willing to do the box office. I mean, you may have to work your way up, but that's what being a community is.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very important point. And I know that's one that was brought up earlier, is this idea that sometimes we've got a link to Together LA, to the festival, for everyone to see. But sometimes if you actually become part of the company, whether it's ushering or things like that, that's how you meet the people, and then you can, slip them the script on the DL. So as we get close to wrapping up, any final bits of advice or things that you've learned? And I know that we've sort of we've talked about. I think there's a lot of really good takeaway from today. But anything that either hasn't come up or that you feel like you really want to drive home in our sort of final few minutes.
I would just say, first of all, remember what Oliver Mayer just said about resilience. It's maybe the most important quality to have if you really want to pursue this. But I would also add to that, remember that it's hard. It might be hard to get produced, but every theater worth its salt, every producing entity, every director, artistic, they're looking for voices. They're not looking for imitations. They're looking for your true voice, that thing that you can say that they haven't heard anyone else say in that way. And if you are able to transmute that voice onto the page and make it come back to the reader and then an audience, you will get produced if you just don't stop trying.
All right.
Very well said.
Boy. I guess I just said boy because I was waiting. I guess I have to speak now. It's perfect. And I wish I'd said what David just said. I think that's so true. The only thing I guess I'd just say is that the work is never done. And I mean, I guess eventually, when you don't wake up and then the work is done. But until that point, and even when you've had great successes or whatever is the outcomes along the way, I think that's the great joy of the theater, is that it's always changing and it needs to be embraced. It's going to change one way or the other, so might as well embrace it. So the work is never done. And that for those reasons, it's probably gives you a sense of humor, even when someone's criticizing you, or even as your hackles are rising, to know that I got a little more work to do. And that's another beautiful reason to wake up in the morning and to do God's work, which is making theater.
Peter.
Yeah, I just think enthusiasm, I think, is what's always sort of infused my life. I've run around being really, this is going to be the most exciting thing. And it's always the next thing you're working on that's going to be like the greatest thing that you ever worked on. And to be able to get up in the morning and dream that this is going to be great, even though you felt that 20 or 30 years ago and that flopped, and this one flopped. It's the one that's just about your writing now that's the future. It's the one that has the right message. It's got all the right things. I'm like, when Wendy was talking about her experiences in New York, I've been there. I've been through that horrible, toxic environment where some director's messing around with your stuff when you're not in rehearsal and not telling you about it, and you have to arrive. And what do? You create a horrible scene. It's an impossible position to be in. And it really, like what happened to you, Wendy, I was knocked around a bit in terms of psychologically. It took me a while to recover from that, a little PTSD. And any director starts doing that now. Oh, yes, I think my Afghan war stuff is going to start coming back, except it happened in New York in a rehearsal room. So there's setbacks. And yet I still wake up in the morning and think, this is going to be great. I'm going to have a fabulous director. I'm going to have a fabulous cast. Oh, it's going to be perfect. And just waking up every day and trying to do that is what keeps me going. And I still believe in the future. I really think things are going to be great, but not tomorrow.
January 20th. Wendy?
Oh, gosh. Well, the three gentlemen just put it all so well. But, I guess the most important thing is, for me, is, work in a theater company, keep working, keep learning, keep growing, keep hearing your work, keep, and it will ignite. And if you have these horrible experiences, which we've all had, for some strange reason, it comes around better. Like the week before, when the actress drops out and you do a Hail Mary and you get somebody in, it always comes out well. So now, having done it, 20, 30, 40 times, now I know, I start to, my breathing starts to get shallow, and I'm like, oh no, it's all going to fall apart. It's all going to fall apart. And then I go, this always happens. It'll be okay. And I think just for us to get back into the place where we're saying to somebody, I can't see you right now. I'm in rehearsal. I mean, I just want to say the words, I'm in rehearsal. And all it takes is one yes. So let it come from you.
Well put, all of you. Yeah, I think that there's a lot to take away in terms of, especially here in 2020, at a time that sometimes it's difficult to have that optimism and to feel like it's we're gonna just keep going, and we just kind of have to every day just get up and tell ourselves that there's more work to do. And to keep going and to feel that optimism for the next thing. And maybe it won't be tomorrow, but maybe it will be. Maybe it will be January 20th. But the work is never done, right? Until we are done. And, and I think that even when you do have that setback, and I have some similar horror stories, but I did learn from them. And so I think that you have to, also just, it's that whole thing of, if it doesn't kill you, it makes you that much stronger for the next production, right? And you know things that I think somebody said this earlier, like if you could have told yourself then, right? And so I think that we all learn. And so when we're always learning. Every production is an opportunity to learn something, whether it's about the play or about how we exist in the theater ecosystem. And I want to thank all of you for offering us some really fabulous insights today and some great anecdotes. I mean, there's some things I didn't know. David, I don't know if I knew you were from Pennsylvania, because I'm from Pennsylvania, so we may have to have that discussion sometime.
Chester County.
I lived a little bit in Chester County, and then I moved to Delaware County. But I used to go to that Pottstown area because Coventry Forge was out there, and that was our family trip. So for those who are suddenly feeling completely excluded, so Coventry Forge was this fabulous old, probably Revolutionary War era inn. Very atmospheric, but there was a wonderful French restaurant there for many years, and that was always, as I was a child, it was a highlight to to go out there, sort of drive with the family in the country and the rolling hills, and so when I heard Pottstown, I was like, that really was sort of very evocative. And so
I went to high school 1.5 miles away from Coventry Forge.
Oh wow. So we're gonna, at some point when the pandemic is over, we're gonna have a drink and we're gonna have that discussion. So, and that's the other thing that you can do. I think we would look forward is just make plans. They may be 6 months from now, but make plans. We will all have those productions in 2021, right? It's coming soon. So, so thank you all. Thank you, audience, for for coming and listening to this really great talk. And Gary has poofed in. It's like Harry Potter world. And thank you, everyone. And this is the
Thank you,
end
John.
of our, thank you.
Yeah,
Yes, thanks,
great.
John.
Thank you.
My
And
pleasure to get to do some panels with all you folks. And tomorrow we will be back, everyone. We start at noon. Looks like there's a oh. We have a comment about mushrooms. That's the Mushroom Museum in the, yeah, it's another
That's
Pennsylvania thing. So tomorrow we'll be back at noon.
That's right. Our panel is
With
at
our
noon
next panel.
tomorrow, which is a little different than today. It's Beyond Dialogue. Playwrights discuss silence, subtext, and subtlety. That should be another wonderful panel.
Yeah.
Then we have our juried play festival right after that.
Yes, so there's going to be some really good, speaking of sort of Zoom, they're not quite productions, but they're readings. And so we're getting some art on Zoom tomorrow. And then after that, we're all going to drink. So, and we invite all the attendees for those things. So, so thank you, everyone. Thank you, panelists. And we bid you all a fond, lovely Saturday afternoon. And again, to find out more about ALAP, you can check the link there, laplaywrights.org. And there's the program for the weekend. All right. So thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And there they